Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a truly fascinating piece of musical history. We're going to examine a record that is raw, definitely imperfect, but absolutely essential if you want to understand one of the most massive cultural legacies of our time. We are looking at Tupac Shakur's 1991 debut solo album, 2Pacalypse Now. Now, it might not be his most beautiful record, and it certainly isn't his most polished. But as our source material today points out, if you really want to understand where everything else came from, all the brilliance, all the wild contradictions, well, this album is the ultimate blueprint. Okay, let's dive right into this.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First up, the incendiary debut. Second, the narrative manifesto. Third, the rough sound. Fourth, an affair of states. And finally, the musical blueprint. All right, Section 1, the incendiary debut. 1991, Tupac arrives.
The sheer velocity of Tupac's rise is just staggering. Think about it. In 1991, this guy's just 20 years old. Just prior to this, he was barely stepping out of the shadow of Digital Underground, the Oakland collective that took him in as a dancer, a roadie, and eventually a backup rapper. By early to mid-1991, he drops a verse on their track Same Song. And then, almost overnight, in November of 1991 on Interscope Records, he drops a full solo debut. He steps right out of the background in an incredible hurry to say some very, very serious things. When you look at the track list, there's something you'll notice immediately: a stark lack of party tracks. Zero. Instead, the album is hyper-focused on the realities around him. We're talking systemic issues like police brutality, extreme poverty, teenage pregnancy, and young black men just crushed by a system offering absolutely no way out. There are no detours here and no protective irony. On the track Trapped, he describes police harassment with a rage that frankly doesn't bother with nuance. On tracks like Soulja's Story, he slips right into the skin of cornered characters. You have to remember, he was raised by a Black Panther activist on political speech since childhood. So he decided his rap was going to be his pamphlet, his newspaper, and his pulpit all at once. Moving on to Section 2, the narrative manifesto, a storytelling approach. If you could only keep one single track from this record to understand Tupac's genius, it would absolutely be Brenda's Got a Baby. It's a masterclass that brilliantly illustrates his signature narrative approach. Over the course of just under 4 minutes, the song tells the devastating story of a 12-year-old girl who gets pregnant, gives birth alone, and goes under. But what really matters here is the method. Tupac doesn't preach to us. He doesn't directly comment. He takes an almost journalistic approach. He picks a first name, a situation, a timeline, and then he steps back, letting the story itself do all the heavy lifting. The crucial point here is that this track, which was reportedly inspired by an actual news item he read in the press, established a profound pattern of empathy. This specific, deep empathy for the women around him really sets Tupac apart from so many of his contemporaries. And what's wild is that this technique is already fully formed right here on his very first album. It's a signature you'll find much later in his career, like in the Portraits of Women on Strictly for My in 1993, and in those deep confessions on Me Against the World in 1995. But it all started with Brenda. Section 3, rough sound, urgent message. Okay, let's be honest for a second. Musically, 2Pacalypse Now definitely shows its age. The production was handled largely by the Digital Underground circle, folks like Shock G, Big D the Impossible, and the Underground Railroad. And it really sticks to the conventions of very early 90s West Coast rap. We're talking funk loops that sometimes run a bit dry, drums that hit hard, but very little of the real sonic sophistication that would define his later work. Some tracks, frankly, have aged badly. But contrast that rough early 90s production with his raw vocal delivery. Right in the middle of that unpolished material, Tupac's voice just cuts through. His timbre, his percussive diction, the way he loads literally every single syllable with this almost theatrical intensity, it is all right there from day one. And this perfectly illustrates a key takeaway. The roughness actually serves the message. A record this urgent, this profoundly angry, simply would not have survived a highly polished, pristine setting. His technique would sharpen over the years, for sure, but the raw grain of his voice and the intense anger of this record perfectly served his immediate message. The imperfections are exactly what make it work so well. All right, Section 4, an affair of state, a political collision. This simmering tension builds to an absolute boiling point in 1992. A deeply tragic incident occurs down in Texas. A young man shoots a police officer during a traffic stop, and later claims he was listening to 2Pacalypse Now at the time. Suddenly, this controversy swells all the way up to the White House. Dan Quayle, the sitting vice president of the United States, who happens to be in the middle of a re-election campaign, publicly declares that this record has no place in American society. He explicitly demands the record label, Interscope, pull it from sale entirely. And Interscope, they refuse to back down. Just consider the sheer magnitude of this historical collision. An American vice president went after the debut album of a 20-year-old rapper by name. This massive controversy provided the ultimate confirmation for Tupac that his words carried real, undeniable weight in society, directly feeding into the massive public persona he was about to build in the years that followed. And that brings us to Section 5, the musical blueprint, a lasting legacy. Everything Tupac would develop later exists right here in embryo. You have the deeply empathetic social storyteller of Brenda's Got a Baby, you've got the fierce, unapologetic rebel of Trapped, and you have the mouthpiece of a generation that knows it's been written off in advance. The fundamental paradox of his entire career is this incredible tension between tenderness and fury, and that exact tension is fully visible right from the start. So I want to ask you directly, based on the source material we've been unpacking, why listen to an imperfect record today? I mean, if you're totally new to Tupac, there are definitely gentler paths in, right? There are much more polished peaks in his discography to check out. Why go back to this rough, unpolished debut? You listen to it to watch a voice being born. You listen to it the exact same way you'd read a great writer's early, unedited graft. On 2Pacalypse now, you are hearing a young man who has absolutely nothing to lose yet. A 20-year-old who still sincerely, purely believes that rap can change things. Our source notes that he would never again find that faith so completely intact. And that is exactly what makes this imperfect, rough, angry record so absolutely precious. So my question to leave you with today is this. In our highly polished, perfectly produced modern era of music, do we still have room for debuts that prioritize raw, world-changing urgency over perfection? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer.